Welcome back, everybody, to Watcher of All Things. My name is Kiki, and this is my podcast where I talk movies, TV shows, and all things entertainment. And today, it is a very fun episode of the podcast. We have yet another Watcher Watchback. It's episode 127, where we are revisiting Dunkirk, the 2017 Christopher Nolan mega-scale World War II action drama. I'm super excited to talk about this movie. I'm going to tell you guys about my original IMAX experience way back in 2017. Was really looking forward to this episode for a long time. I've had it penciled into my calendar forever that the week before the Odyssey, I want to talk about Dunkirk specifically. We actually got our first reactions to the Odyssey after the world premiere. Apparently, it is legendary. It is epic filmmaking. It's everything you would expect from a Christopher Nolan movie. So I'm very excited to see it. 1 week from, or a week and 2 days from today, actually. I'm recording this on a Tuesday night because I am traveling this weekend. So figured I would get in a little bit early. I'm excited to talk about the Odyssey next week, though. I'm actually seeing it 3 times next weekend, so going to be a lot of Odyssey on my radar. But before we get to Dunkirk or the Odyssey, I hope you are all doing well. It is lovely weather here in Toronto. It is still World Cup fever. I just watched Switzerland defeat Colombia on penalty kicks, or penalties as we call it as soccer fans. But okay, a couple things to plug before we get into the news section of the show. I said I was making a Dark Knight Trilogy revisited video for my YouTube channel. I'm actually going to push that to the week after the Odyssey. So 2 weeks from now, I suppose, or the week after that, or like end of July, I would say. Going to be a banger. Also, of course, timestamps below today. I don't want to spoil anything for you. If you haven't seen Dunkirk, fantastic film. Do yourself a favor and watch it. It is absolutely gorgeous in 4K. I watched it on the 4K disc and it looks mesmerizing. So for today, timestamps below, we're going to have the news section, non-spoilers, spoilers, and then what else I watched. It's going to be a banger episode. But okay, without any further ado, let's get into the news. Our first piece of news is James Cameron announced Terminator 2 will return to theaters on August 28th. He said, quote, "I believe it's safe to do spoilers after 35 years, so spoiler alert, the good guys win against the AI superintelligence. Maybe that's a message of hope we could all use this summer." Now, this comes out, at the same time that there's an AI Appreciation Day happening this summer, which is just fucking stupid to me. But Gore Verbinski, they are re-releasing Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die in some theaters as well, and he is doing like a live Q&A, or he's gonna have a Q&A special screening within Los Angeles, I think. So a bit of counter programming to a really weird day to have after the almost AI revolution, and after the AI is slowly killing us all. Like, data centers could raise the global temperature by 2 degrees, which would literally wipe us all out and kill millions, if not billions of people. So maybe we don't do that. And maybe we need more films like James Cameron's The Terminator or Terminator 2, where it's about robots and the dangers of robots. But, at least this one is helping to defeat AI superintelligence. And it's interesting, James Cameron's relationship to AI, because I could have sworn a couple of years ago, he was like backing this one AI company, and he was one of like the ground floor investors for it. And then suddenly he's kind of pulled back his opinions on AI, and he's much more, it needs to be done safely, and I'm against it in filmmaking, but we need to learn how we could use it in filmmaking without replacing people's jobs. So I do appreciate his nuance on the topic, which it seems like we don't really get a lot of. Even for myself, sometimes I'm very just like blatantly hate all AI, and sometimes maybe I could look into what is actually happening with this AI. Is it something that we've used before and it's just being reinvented in some way? There's things like that where maybe I could do a little bit more research, but for the most part, I am just pretty anti-AI. Like, no matter what it is, I really don't give a shit. I think it makes so many people stupider, makes us lazier, and we need more films like Terminator 2 and, Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die, which are very, very, very clearly against AI, and they're pushing back against AI. So that is some fun news. Now, speaking of that is some very fun news, I look forward to seeing Terminator 2 in theaters, hopefully around Labor Day, I guess. Our next story says Indy Navarrete, who is, of course, the breakout star from Obsession, a film that has just been climbing and climbing. I'm pretty sure it's going to cross 400 million at the box office, which is just absolutely absolutely insane, almost unheard of. Apparently, she has had meetings with Jake Schreier, who is directing the new X-Men film, as well as just Marvel Studios in general. She has also had a meeting with Michael Mann, who of course is casting Heat 2 right now. So she has some very big roles in her future, and I'm very excited for that. The fact that she's going to be in a Marvel film is, I think, a great thing. She's done superhero stuff before. She was on Superman and Lois, the CW TV show, which everybody only has positive things to share about. Apparently, it's a fantastic show. Haven't got around to watching it, but I actually might check it out at some point because apparently it's very good Superman property. Love Superman, and I think she would be fantastic as nearly any of the female X-Men characters. I mean, she could even be, X-23. She could be Rogue. She could be Jean Grey, even though Sadie Sink is going to be playing Jean Grey. But I think they are going for this like younger generation of X-Men characters. We know very little about what the X-Men film is actually going to look like. I know it's not going to involve Wolverine. It's going to be about a group of young X-Men characters who are a part of this like underground mutant society that are solving crime and trying to rescue other X-Men or other mutants in the world, rather. So I'm excited for that. I think under the guise of sort of Jake Schreier, who I think did a very good job with Thunderbolts, and the writers are from Beef, and they've done some very, very, very good stuff. I sort of have high confidence in this, and I think Thunderbolts, all of the team dynamics were extremely well measured. Everybody gets a moment to shine, unless you're a character that dies in the first 5 minutes. But, it sort of picks the characters who are going to have the main spotlight of the story, but all of the supporting characters still sort of have their moments, which is what you want in an X-Men film. Everybody needs to sort of serve the story a little bit, get a little bit of a moment to shine and show their powers off. And I would love Indy Navarrete actually as Rogue would be fantastic. I think she would be so good. Although Keke Palmer has talked about playing Rogue in the past, I think she'd be very good. But if they're going for this younger generation of X-Men, maybe you move away from that and you really do go with the young generation. Like, as for Heat 2, if she's going to be in Heat 2, that would be insane. I have no clue who she would be playing because she feels like a lot younger than the rest of the cast members who have pretty much been confirmed or are rumored to at least be in this. So whatever she's doing next, I'm very interested in. I hope she's in Curry Barker's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. She'd be a great final girl, and I'd love to see her be the horror sort of queen in a story rather than the sort of villain in some parts of Obsession, or made out to be the villain when in actuality she's being taken advantage of. But okay, let's move on to our next story. Very happy for Indy Navarrete. Toy Story 5, which, what did I say? It's gonna just absolutely print money. All of these movies just make a ridiculous amount of money. Well, within 3 weeks, it has made $750 million worldwide. The film will officially pass $1 billion probably after this weekend, if it hasn't already. Like, I'm recording this Tuesday night. Currently, it's at 755. I think it's gonna pass it very soon. This movie just cannot stop doing well. And it's not even just like North America and Europe. It's doing well globally. Like, everybody absolutely loves Toy Story. What did I say in my review? Everybody has a connection to Toy Story. Everybody has at least some reference or some sort of viewpoint connection to the Toy Story films, which is, part of everybody's childhood. Even if you don't love the movies, you at least know the story of Woody and Buzz Lightyear and Jessie, and you can sort of figure out how old you were when some of the movies were coming out. Like, everybody has some kind of story to share about Toy Story, myself included. Like, I've seen every single movie, actually not every single movie in theaters because I was born in 2000, but obviously 3, 4, and 5 I've seen in theaters. 1 and 2 I was a huge fan of as a child. Like, my brother and I would watch Toy Story 2 all the time. So this new generation seems to be very in love with Toy Story as well, but it also has the combination of a Taylor Swift song, of millennials loving it, and the older generation. So it's sort of the perfect 4 quartet, or the 4, what do you call that, 4 quadrants type movie, where you want it to hit all of these major groups of nostalgia, new audiences, older audiences, like bringing in the young people as well, which some movies struggle to do. Like Supergirl has flopped extremely hard. I think it's past 100 million now, but it will most definitely not break even, and it looks like it's actually just going to go to digital in 30 days, which is very bad. So DCU is sort of struggling at the moment with Supergirl, but we did get a new poster for Lanterns this week. Looks really good. Toy Story 5 printing money before Moana comes out next week, which which I am going to see next Wednesday probably. I'll put a review in the What Else I Watched segment next week, as well as I'll do one for my social media on Thursday. I'm also going to try and see Evil Dead Burn, but lots of movies coming out. Of course, The Odyssey comes out next week, which seems like more adults will go to see that rather than Toy Story 5, but I still think Toy Story 5 going to make a bunch of money, easily going to pass probably 1.2 billion, I would say. But let's move into our next story. Speaking of millennials trying to cling on to their nostalgia, Harold and Kumar 4 will begin filming soon. Yes, that's right. We have another legacy sequel or return sequel. Like, we have Super Troopers 3 coming out, I think, next week, and John Cho and Kal Penn are set to return in Harold and Kumar 4. I don't know why we need this movie. It seems like everybody is trying to bring back the early 2000s comedy. Like, Sacha Baron Cohen just did another Ali G film for some reason, which is a character that hasn't been relevant in probably 22 years. I don't understand this wave of nostalgia that we're on right now. It just seems like, why make original comedies when you can bring back that obscure, not obscure, but like, you know, smaller field classic stoner comedy from when you were a teenager, and let's make a fourth one about how they're old and sad, and like, yeah, that's gonna just make $1 kajillion, and that's a really necessary story that we need in Hollywood right now. I don't get it. We're gonna have Dude, Where's My Car 2 in no time. We're gonna have whatever, Friends with Benefits 2. It's gonna be tons of these weird nostalgia legacy sequel. Like, even The Devil Wears Prada 2, I love that movie. I think it was extremely fun, but you have to admit, like, did we need a Devil Wears Prada 2 sequel? I think it had enough original things to say about the period that we're living in right now within the world of fashion and tech, and how art is sort of being devalued by society and pushed to the back burner over fast trends and sort of consumable things in person. But Harold and Kumar 4, what is this going to have to say about society at large? Like, sure, they went to Guantanamo Bay for one of them. They went to White Castle for another. We're good, bro. Let's move into our final story, though, which is a major surprise to me. So Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, or just Dwayne Johnson, which is what he's going by as an actor, will star in Freebird, a new film directed by Greg Quidar, who, if you don't know, Greg Quidar did Sing Sing, a fantastic film from a couple years ago. 2 years ago, starring Coleman Domingo, about a prison that has a drama department, and it's a group of incarcerated men who are putting on a production. It's just a gorgeous film. One of my favorite movies of 2024. Check it out. Well, this film that will star Dwayne Johnson, the film follows a Las Vegas motorcycle stuntman who conceals his dementia diagnosis from everyone as he risks doing one last jump. I think that's a really interesting premise. I'm fascinated by Dwayne Johnson's sort of next period in his career. He just did The Smashing Machine. He's doing a Marty Scorsese film. Then he cashed in on Moana live action, Jumanji. But here we go. We have another dramatic role that he's going into. I'm very curious. What is his mixture going to be of like blockbuster sort of money grabbing films versus doing these real auteur driven films like this one? This sounds so interesting. I love the premise of him having to deal with dementia. I think Dwayne Johnson, you know, like The Smashing Machine, it's going to be about sort of taking on that burden of your disability or what you're struggling with and trying to still fulfill yourself with your art. So I think this has the potential to be very interesting. I'm very excited for it. I thought Sing Sing was one of the best movies easily of 2024. Coleman Domingo should have had an Oscar nomination. It is just a travesty that he didn't, or honestly, he should have won. Wait, was he nominated for an Oscar? I feel like he was. Yes, I think he was, but he should have won. Absolutely. I think I'm going to wrap up the news there, though, because we have a big movie to talk about today. I love Dunkirk. I'm very excited to talk about this movie with you guys. If you haven't seen it, I highly suggest go watch Dunkirk. It is not long at all. It's a fantastic war film. You're going to really enjoy watching it before The Odyssey, especially. I think it's extremely rewarding. But okay, timestamps below. We're going to have non-spoilers, spoilers, but let's do it. Let's talk about Dunkirk. Dunkirk is a 2017 war action film coming in at 1 hour, 46 minutes. It is directed by Christopher Nolan and written by Christopher Nolan only. This does not have Jonathan Nolan also writing with him, his brother. I'm pretty sure this may have been his first film where he wasn't writing with his brother, because I do think Jonathan Nolan was a part of Inception and Interstellar, if I'm not mistaken. I think that is correct. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but really interesting that we're getting into the phase of of Nolan's career where he's writing by himself. Reviews largely positive, 78% on IMDb, 92% on Rotten Tomatoes with an 81% audience score, 3.8 on Letterboxd with a 4-star mode. It had a budget of $100 million and its box office return was ka-ching, $549 million globally. The synopsis for Dunkirk: the story of the miraculous evacuation of Allied soldiers from Belgium, Britain, Canada, and France who were cut off and surrounded by the German army from the beaches and harbor of Dunkirk between May 26th and June 4th, 1940 during World War II. The film stars Finn Whitehead as Tommy, Tom Hardy as Farrier, Mark Rylance as Mr. Dawson, Kenneth Branagh as Commander Bolton, Cillian Murphy as Shivering Soldier, great name, Barry Keoghan as George, Harry Styles, yes, that's right, Harry Styles as Alex, Anur Barnard as Gibson, Damien Bonnard as French Soldier, Lee Armstrong as Grenadier, James Blore as Irate Soldier, Tom Glyn Carney as Peter, Jack Loudon, who is married to Saoirse Ronan, as Collins, and James Darcy as Colonel Winnant. This is a really fantastic cast, but okay, here we go. My initial thoughts on my rewatch of Dunkirk. I have not watched this since 2023. Maybe not Nolan's masterpiece, given how sort of simple it can feel at times. I think this is a very straightforward film, but goddamn, this is like one of the blockbusters of my lifetime. This film has always had such an impression on me, and I think Dunkirk is just absolutely fantastic from start to finish. I mean, it's definitely better than The Prestige for me. I think The Prestige has a fantastic premise, and it really does do all the twists and turns, and it's a great fictional story. This has elements of fiction, of course, with all of its characters, but this is just a great historical drama, thriller, action film for me that is endlessly rewarding when you watch it over and over again. And it was actually a really interesting road to Dunkirk being made. One of my favorite parts of the Watcher Watchback episodes that we do is reading about the development of all of these films. So Christopher Nolan actually thought of the movie in the mid-90s when he and his future wife, Emma Thomas, sailed across the English Channel. They were following the path of many of the small boats that were involved in World War II's Dunkirk evacuation. Nolan had actually considered improvising the entire film instead of writing a script, but it was actually his wife, Thomas, that convinced him otherwise. And in 2015, Nolan wrote a 76-page screenplay, which was about half the length of his usual screenplays, his shortest to date. You can really notice that with just the lack of dialogue. Its precise structure necessitated fictional characters rather than ones based on eyewitnesses. So the actual event of Dunkirk is very fascinating when you read about it. I highly suggest you read about the actual Dunkirk evacuation. The opening crawl of this movie just does a fantastic job sort of setting the tone of how desperate they were to escape and how much of just a disaster this was. I mean, it was a real failure. It's 16 days into Winston Churchill as prime minister after Neville Chamberlain had come in and he had used, appeasement to sort of appease Hitler the year before, saying Britain was not ready for war, or rather the 2 years prior. And then we get to 1940 where Britain is fully at war and the Germans have completely surrounded them, and Dunkirk is seen as this mass humiliation, and that is sort of setting the tone for this film. Now, with new releases, I always tell you about my theater reaction. My theater reaction for this one was 9 years ago, but I still remember it to this day. I saw Dunkirk with my parents and my brother in IMAX in Ottawa. It is hands down the loudest IMAX experience I have ever had. Like, Dunkirk was the loudest movie I've ever seen in a movie theater. It was deafening. It was shocking, even more than F1 last year, which was like a concert. It was so loud with the cars and the revving and the racing. Dunkirk, with all of the planes flying overhead and the explosions, was like nothing I've ever experienced before, but also just the picture. I'm never going to forget how gorgeous this film was on a huge IMAX screen, even if it wasn't like the true giant IMAX that we have here in Scotiabank in Toronto. It was more the classic IMAX that is just a big screen that looks absolutely gorgeous. But then watching this at home on a 4K disc, and I've watched this plenty of times on my Blu-ray disc, but I actually this weekend upgraded Interstellar, the Dark Knight trilogy, and Dunkirk all to be on 4K, and then I got Insomnia on Blu-ray. You can check out an unboxing on my social media. Watching this in 4K at home, the just IMAX aspect ratio is like a punch to the face. Also, the sound mixing is just genuinely so much better than the Blu-ray. That is one thing about upgrading your 4K discs, is they are usually improved when it comes to sound mixing. The thing about the 4K movies and even HD movies, which I've been having an issue recently on the Apple app when I'm watching films with really loud soundtracks and and dialogue at the same time is they almost like start cutting out, or they start flickering a little bit, where it's like with the sound. So I've had no issues while watching 4K discs, and the sound was just absolutely gorgeous. I love the score, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but watching this at home in 4K, I was shocked how enjoyable it was and how it like nearly measures up to the IMAX experience in theaters. Obviously it never will, because that was just such a unique time in a movie theater where I was like, holy shit, this feels larger than life. The scope and the scale of this movie is just genuinely breathtaking. Now let's talk about the performances, because I think this is probably the most interesting acting within all of Nolan's films. The performances are not necessarily given that much from the screenplay to work off of, because there isn't necessarily tons of like personality cues in there. It's a very sort of pulled back. Everyone has a very small amount of information that we're given about the characters. So all of these performances are really just sort of intuition, and they're not really telling us a lot about all of these characters. There's very few actual performances in this film that are coming from like huge emotional life stories. It's all very constricted to the events of this week that we are watching transpire. And I really find it fascinating, all the performances from everyone here. Finn Whitehead, who you might know from Black Mirror Bandersnatch, that's basically what I know him from. He is sort of our main character. He's the main soldier that we are following. He's on all the posters. I think he's very good as Tommy in this film. Obviously, he has very little dialogue. I love how young he is, and it really does immediately punch you in the gut how young all of these men are. Like everybody that is at war, that is trapped here, they're all probably my age, 25 and younger. Tragic how many young men are here on this beach, and he does a great job playing up the fear and the constant rising of anxiety throughout the film. And then you have like Tom Hardy, who's much more of a veteran within Christopher Nolan's sort of acting universe by this point, playing a pilot named Farrier, who is basically the hero of the story that we're following kind of the most from start to finish. And we're still in non-spoilers. I'm not going to say what happens to his character, but definitely I would say all the dogfighting in this film has a really interesting implication about the personality types of our pilots. And I think Tom Hardy has a very limited sort of scope to work with here, but he is absolutely fantastic every moment. My favorite performance in the film, hands down though, Mark Rylance as Mr. Dawson, who is this civilian sailor that is using his boat to sail across the channel to Dunkirk to rescue as many soldiers as he can, to bring them back because the Navy is commandeering as many of these British citizenships that they can from his town. And it's just, I think he's doing so much with his performance. He's definitely given the most sort of backstory that we're told about this person, which I really enjoy. But I mean, it's Mark Rylance. When is he ever bad in a performance ever? I think he is fantastic in every film he is. I mean, I think of like Bridge of Spies, obviously Bones and All. He's a classic actor, and it's a shame that this is his only performance in a Nolan film. I wish he would maybe work with him again, because every scene he has is just so devastating and vulnerable, and it's coming from a place of fear, which we slowly learn throughout the entire film. And a lot of Nolan's storytelling can come from places of vulnerability and fear about the future, and based on the past. It's sort of the story of Odysseus as well that we're going to get within the Odyssey. And then, we have Kenneth Branagh, who I think is fantastic as Commander Bolton, a much more restricted performance. He's actually not in the film that much, but Cillian Murphy as Shivering Soldier, fantastic. I think this was his 5th time working with Nolan, 4th time. We have Batman Begins, Dark Knight Rises, Inception, much more of sort of a bit more of a leading role. I mean, it's a supporting role, but he's given a much more sort of villainous nature to him, or not really villainous, but you feel bad for him the entire time. It's a different kind of role to what he's had before. Obviously, as Jonathan Crane, Scarecrow, he's just a straight up villain. Inception, he's sort of this, rich Nepo baby that has clearly had some daddy issues, versus this is a very sort of cold, quiet, reserved type soldier who is shell-shocked, and I love his performance in this film. Barry Keoghan, fantastic as George. This was the first movie I saw with Barry Keoghan. Harry Styles is just like really good as Alex. He's given very little dialogue, and all the moments that he does get, I think he really does command the screen, and he's just this asshole British soldier. There's a bunch of other fantastic performances, but I want to talk about a lot of the technical elements and the direction of Dunkirk in general, because I think the direction of this film is absolutely fascinating. I think this film was where probably one of the most valuable valuable projects in the lead up to the Odyssey. Definitely with Christopher Nolan directing action on land, in air, in water, using all of these big, huge to scale explosions and directing so many soldiers all at once. That is very Odyssey. And it really helps with the versatility needed for the beasts of Homer's tale, the Odyssey. And I also think coming off of a film like Interstellar, which is just so out of this world, larger than life, this is a much more scaled down, accessible film. Like one of the most obviously talked about points of Interstellar is just how insane the story is and how the final act can get a little bit confusing for some people because they're like, I don't get the science of it, or even Inception. Versus this, if you understand, war and who these people are, you know what's going on. It's a very accessible human story, maybe his most human story to date, other than Oppenheimer, of course. But it is fascinating to me, and this is a theme that we see in so many of Christopher Nolan's films, and how I actually think his career has really been building to the Odyssey. But how many of his movies are about getting home, sort of the Odyssey? This is also about getting home and coming back from the scars of war and trying to survive and bring your kingdom back to power. It's the same thing with Interstellar, about saving your home planet. The Dark Knight Rises, Bruce has to escape from this cave to save his home city. Inception is in many ways about saving your family or finding home again within Leonardo DiCaprio's character trying to find his wife and kids again. So many of Christopher Nolan's characters are really an Odysseus type who have to battle these many gods and demons in their life and things that they have to face, whether it is fear or insanity, depression, or sci-fi elements, whatever it might be. There's been so many different things that our main characters have dealt with across all of Nolan's films. They're all trying to return to something after these sins they've sort of committed or things they regret in their life. And within Dunkirk, I've sort of touched on this a little bit, but crafting, character arcs and miniature slices of life for each character in a world where we get to know very little about these men. Obviously, they are soldiers. You understand they are young people who have been drafted or joined the military in Britain to go and fight against Nazi Germany, who have invaded several countries or a couple of countries beside Germany, like Poland and Czechoslovakia and Austria. So the context of Europe at this time. We don't get to see them outside of these war settings. Like the amount of time that we get to know these people is strictly stuck to this week and a couple of days. That is it. There's no flashbacks, no flash forwards. Where the movie ends is where the movie ends. Where it begins is right when this conflict is really hitting its highest point. We can empathize with these people, and I really do love how sort of simplified everybody is. It's not that they are caricatures, but they're these recognized characters and these recognized people that you can understand are going through the Dunkirk disaster. Two soldiers lost from their units, or who have lost their units rather, a soldier surviving a sinking boat and finding civilians, a young boy wanting to make his father proud, so he sort of sticks along with his best friend and his dad as they go on this adventure, a father and son who are just trying to make an effort to help given what they have gone through as a family. There's all of these sort of recognizable things that we've seen throughout history, and all of these stories that we know from so many films and tales and literature, but just real life people as well that we have met, or we understand, veterans or whatever it might be, people that are battling things in life, why people go to war or why people struggle through these types of journeys and what they are trying to survive. And as a master's in history student, obviously maybe I bring it up too much on this podcast, but yes, I studied history in school, and I love the accuracy, the attention to detail in this film is just absolutely fantastic. It was really interesting when Dunkirk came out, how many veterans actually came out of the movie saying the planes were not that loud as opposed to the IMAX screenings that we're at. But I really do adore how much historical accuracy there is here. But at the same time, I appreciate that Christopher Nolan is making up these fictional characters and these fictional storylines that probably could have existed. And, there could have been people like these people that we are watching throughout the film, whether they are from land, sea, or air. But I appreciate that Christopher Nolan is giving us these recognizable storylines. That way, we're not just watching a historical reenactment of Dunkirk go down. We're getting to understand and enjoy the emotions that are at stake, and there needs to be stakes other than we want to get home. Why do they want to get home? What has been the dynamic at interplay between the soldiers who have been stuck on this beach for a week. Really fascinating to me. And, there's just so much fantastic action in this film. It's definitely not a boring or quiet movie. And there's the type of action that's going to satisfy everyone, whether you like dogfights and you're interested in sort of naval warfare or aerial warfare, or just sort of in the streets at the very start of the film. Whatever it is, air, sea, water, land, fire, earth, wind, all of that stuff. Every element is involved here. And that's like what I was saying before, how Nolan really gets to practice different forms of action and combat within this film before the Odyssey. But Dunkirk, when you're watching it, just has so much fantastic action and big scale action, especially to offer. And, this was the highest grossing World War II film of all time when it was released. $549 million on a budget of $100 million. And the only film to beat Dunkirk when it comes to World War II historical films, another little film called Oppenheimer, which made $900 million. So Christopher Nolan setting records over himself. Really fascinating how he is the only one with the top two. And I think because, people who are interested in history could find this film really entertaining because it has all the details about it. But then people who are not interested in the historical aspects can enjoy it because of the human elements and the stories that we are getting. Nolan said that he approached research as though it were a documentary, and he was attracted to the subject matter because of its inversion of the Hollywood formula, depicting a military retreat centered on the Franco-British forces in place of the typical heroic narrative of victorious Americans. This is from Wikipedia, by the way. I think that's a really undervalued thing that we are getting. So many World War II movies that we, have loved over the years, whether it's Saving Private Ryan, are all about the surviving Americans who are making this grand stand, versus this is a much more sad and, I don't want to say pathetic, but like tail between their legs type story where the British have been humiliated. Like, this was a disaster. I don't think that can be emphasized enough. And Nolan, he kept pushing Dunkirk further and further down the line. It's sort of like Schindler's List for Steven Spielberg. He was not mentally ready or emotionally ready to take on this film, versus Nolan. Within this film, he wanted more blockbuster experience. Obviously, he thought of this movie in the mid 1990s when he was on that trip with his future wife. But, he could have made this in the early 2000s. Instead, he chose to wait and really get the blockbuster experience under his belt with the Dark Knight trilogy, Inception, Interstellar. And I think it was the perfect time in Nolan's career to make this film because, like I've said so many times, perfect practice. And I think it was the most useful film for training Nolan for the Odyssey to come soon. And it was just a really different kind of directional change for Nolan to take. He hadn't really done nonfiction stories or stories based in history, really, like Interstellar, Inception, Insomnia, Memento, following the Dark Knight trilogy. He hadn't really dabbled in this world yet. So to take on this history project was really cool. And, one of the most important things that he wanted to do with this film is just evoking the British point of view. The Germans are not in this movie. We do not see a single German's face. We very briefly get Germans involved, and I'm not going to spoil it, of course, but contact with the enemy was extremely limited and intermittent at Dunkirk. He did not show Germans on screen. I love that choice, and I think that is a really valuable part of this story because we are so hyper-focused on what was happening on the beach, how was the rescue developing, and how did it actually play out between soldiers, what were the dynamics between them, what were commanders saying, everybody's embarrassed, what was the reaction when they were rescued, because obviously Dunkirk, they were rescued, World War II, they go on to win the war, but I really enjoy not showing that Nazi perspective. We all know what the Nazis were like. It's not needed. We don't need their point of view or their input. It's sort of like showing the atomic bomb actually being dropped in Oppenheimer. We know what happened. We know how horrible it was and what the aftermath was. That is not the story that this movie is focusing on. Dunkirk is about Dunkirk only, and it's about the rescue of the soldiers at Dunkirk. Oppenheimer is about a man who created one of the greatest scientific inventions of our time with a crazy team of scientists, but then immediately regretted it and didn't realize he had opened Pandora's box. So it's really interesting how we have two films and the most, nonfiction stories of Nolan's career where he's choosing to purposefully eliminate one point of view for the sake of focus and for the sake of not telling a story we've seen before. Like, what if we really do restrict ourselves to this point of view for the sake of drama? Now, coming to a more technical term now, obviously we're going to talk about some nerdy stuff that I want to talk about, but Hoyt van Hoytema. This was the second film that he had worked on with Christopher Nolan after Interstellar versus Wally Pfister. Cannot remember how to say say his name, but it's his second film working with Christopher Nolan. I think Van Hoytema is probably a better cinematographer than Wally Pfister. I think he was fantastic in the Dark Knight trilogy, all the films that he worked with Nolan on, but Pfister has this very early 2000s sort of cleanliness to all of his screens where yes, he can do the heat sort of navy blue look that we get in the Dark Knight, and it's very clean IMAX gorgeous cinematography in the rest of the trilogy, as well as Memento, Inception, The Prestige. But it looks like a lot of other films versus Hoyt Van Hoytema. I don't think there's a lot of other cinematographers working that have films that look like Hoyt Van Hoytema. Maybe only Autumn Gerald Arkapaw. That might be it, where there's some use of like the blue and orange tones. But Hoyt Van Hoytema just has such a beautiful range to all of the blue shades he's doing and that navy mix with like oranges that are so nicely intertwined. And this was sort of a pioneering film in many ways when it comes to IMAX. So according to, Wikipedia and IMDb and all these facts that I've looked up, the film was shot in natural lighting using both IMAX 65mm and 65mm large format film stock in Panavision System 65. With more IMAX footage than in any of Nolan's previous films, it was an estimated 75%. So the sparsity of dialogue made it way more possible for IMAX cameras, which are notoriously loud, to be used as the primary format. We know that has been a big issue with the IMAX cameras in the past, whether it was on Nope or even Oppenheimer. There's been plenty of ADR that has had to actually go into the IMAX film productions because it is just so hard to capture what is actually being said with these ginormous tanks of cameras. Versus the Odyssey, they managed to transform it by making it a lot quieter by essentially putting this like soundproofing dome over it, which is really fascinating. Yeah, just really cool. And for the first time in a feature film, IMAX cameras were actually used in a handheld way. So Steven Spielberg and Ron Howard had actually advised this was the best way to shoot on vessels. Fascinating to see the progression of IMAX with this film. I remember when Dunkirk came out, it was a huge deal because so much of the movie was in IMAX, and it's so worth it, guys. I'm telling you, if you have a 4K player and a 4K TV, owning the 4K discs for these movies is worth it because you get the IMAX formatting ratio changes. So much of this movie was fully in the IMAX ratio, and it was fucking gorgeous, like just life-changing to watch at home. I cannot wait to rewatch the Dark Knight trilogy in a couple of weeks. I'm going to rewatch them again before I make my YouTube video, but just you're not missing out. It is just absolutely gorgeous in this format. Now, it wouldn't be a Nolan film without messing around with time. Dunkirk is told through the perspectives of people on land over a week, the sea over a day, and the air over an hour. Maybe my only complaint with Dunkirk is I think the sort of time looping and lapsing over each other is a little bit confusing for me. I still don't understand, wait, did we already see this and we're just getting it from the other perspective? When is this taking place? This was before that and that was before that. And it gets a little bit messy for me sometimes. Maybe that's my only complaint. I find the mixture of time and perspectives a little confusing, but one of the rare times in this film, it is one of the rare times where Nolan actually displays the time and location. He says, the mole, and it is 1 week, air, 1 hour, the sea, 1 day. And I appreciate that because I said in The Prestige, it would be helpful maybe sometimes if he had included the time and the date or the location and date rather. But he said he wanted to incorporate throughout the film what he calls his snowballing effect, which, several seemingly disparate storylines are connecting that he had really previously only used in the third acts of his films versus this movie. It does feel like a Nolan third act where we're seeing everything converge at once and we're getting all these shifting perspectives. Dunkirk is essentially that the entire time. And, just quickly, I want to touch before we get into spoilers about Hans Zimmer's score. I think this is one of his more subtle scores. I mean, we know Inception and Interstellar are so loud and in your face, particularly Inception, which I'm very excited to hear in theaters in 3 weeks. But I love the Dunkirk score. It's way more sort of subtle in the background, ticking clock and like looming danger. It takes a little bit more of a backseat as opposed to the Dark Knight, Interstellar, Inception. But let's get in my 2 stars and a wish. Then I want to talk some spoilers. Star number 1. I think the scale of this film is just like endlessly rewarding. It is daunting. You feel like you can't get away from this damn beach. Star number 2 is just fantastic performances. Like I said, it's very limited context of of the people's lives that we get to know here, but what we are given really does shape the performances so well. And then my wish is just maybe, I don't know, the convergence of all these timelines gets a little bit messy for me sometimes, but I think, look, overall, Dunkirk is a Nolan movie that I could watch once a week. I think as a master's in history grad, I love the accuracy, attention to detail, all that stuff, but the willingness to smudge some details and give us these emotional story arcs within this tale is really fascinating to me. I don't think it's a perfect film, but it's just like incredibly audacious. I love the use of IMAX for 75% plus of this movie. So I gave Dunkirk 4.5 out of 5. I absolutely love this movie. Do yourself a favor, watch it before the Odyssey. I think it's a great warm up for that, but let's get into some spoilers. Okay, spoilers for Dunkirk. I nearly said the Odyssey, but that'll be 7 days from now. Okay, opening with a bang and just the immense sort of empathy that you immediately have for Tommy. I have always loved the opening of this film, how we're just sort of lost in these streets of France and sort of making our way towards the beach. Suddenly one of these soldiers picks up a paper and it's like a Nazi propaganda sheet that says, "We are all around you." And it's just like strikes fear immediately. And again, we're not seeing the Germans. You never see the Germans in this film until the final frame when you sort of see them when they take Tom Hardy's character. But I just think that's such a like an immediate dominance of fear. And then we had the Frenchman on the beach, and it's just it's such a whirlwind opening to this film where it's really like, oh, one guy is by himself. Then he happens to run into someone else and makes sort of an awkward introduction because he's literally about to shit on a bunch of dead people. But finding the Frenchman on the beach, who is allegedly Gibson, the British soldier, which eventually is revealed to be actually a Frenchman who has taken the clothes of a British soldier. Harry Styles' character, Alex, I think is his name. Alex, is that it? Yes, he says that like, oh, he probably took his uniform, and it's never fully defined like, oh, did he kill that British soldier or what happened? I think it's probably that the British soldier did die and he took, one of the wounded and he buried him, or he maybe even dug him up and took his clothes and then buried his uniform with his. But it's always such an interesting vibe with the British soldier who has very little to say, but you can just tell he does not look English like the rest of these men. He has a very scared, frightened, quiet outsider look to him. And then just like the multiple torpedoes throughout the entire film striking fear into you. The Frenchman knows not to go underwater because that is immediately, he's going to be exposed basically. And he also can't be inside because I think he knows if he goes inside, people are going to talk to him and it could turn into a hostile environment. So it's not that he wants a quick escape like Tommy says to Alex. Maybe that might be it. He hates inside features because later in the film, he's stuck inside of a boat with all these Scottish soldiers as well as Alex and Tommy. And what do you know? He gets exposed as a Frenchman because they talk to him directly when they're not outside. So I think that's sort of the reasoning behind him not getting down there. But speaking of actually being in that boat with all the Scottish soldiers as well as the Dutch ship captain, they're waiting for the tide to carry them out. That is literally the blueprint for the Odyssey's Trojan horse. And again, that is why I find this movie so interesting, because it is fully Christopher Nolan preparing for the Odyssey in a really organic way. It's not that he's been sort of shaping his entire career getting ready for the Odyssey. Maybe he's always had a dream in mind of wanting to work on the Odyssey. I don't think so, but it's like he's slowly been sort of putting these little skills and practice things or these rehearsals in his utility belt for eventually making the Odyssey in the future. Soldiers hiding themselves inside of a ship, trying not to be discovered and trick their way into a battle, or in this case, getting away from battle. It's a little bit different of like an end goal of why they are hiding inside of this, but fully how Christopher Nolan is capturing it is exactly how we saw it in the Odyssey prologue. And it's just fascinating to see that sort of one-to-one translation so cleanly in a director's career. I feel like we don't get that often. Now, Harry Styles killing the Frenchman, and I have to say, the boat section where they are waiting for the tide to come out is such an interesting portion of the film. How there's like target practice from the Germans, the ship captain jumps down with them, it's them all killing time. We have the Frenchman who is at first, oh sorry, I just got a text from my mom saying we watched The Sheep Detectives, such a good movie, thank you for the recommendation. Hey, I aim to please. I'm happy my parents enjoyed it. I love The Sheep Detectives. Anyways, back to Dunkirk. I really enjoy the entire boat section because there's so much information coming out so quickly about our soldiers on the beach. What is the dynamic between the French, the British, I nearly said the Scottish, but the Scottish are the British, same country. But the lack of remorse that the Scottish have for the Frenchman is what really sticks out to me every single time. And then you have Harry Styles killing the Frenchman by hooking him down and drowning him in the water. Just a very cold and terrifying moment that every single time sort of breaks my heart, with how Harry Styles, his character Alex, is coming at this movie from such a vulnerable and insecure place. He thinks, oh, everyone's going to be embarrassed by us. This is a colossal military failure. How are we going to carry on from here? They're going to hang us in the streets when we get home. In reality, at the end of the film, it is not like that. We'll get to that in a moment, but you can really see how he's operating in total fear, vulnerability, insecurity. And then you have the Frenchman, who maybe the British were blaming the French as well for putting up such poor defenses with the Nazis just completely steamrolling them. But the lack of remorse that he has, or empathy for the French soldier, is very telling. And then you have, Cillian Murphy's tragic character, who has always been such a highlight of this film for me. And I remember this was the real first role that I got to see Cillian Murphy sort of flesh himself out in, or really show his acting chops. I hadn't watched Inception until only a few years ago. I think maybe during COVID or just prior to COVID. Maybe it was right before I got Letterboxd or right after. I'm not sure when I actually got, when I watched Inception for the first time. Was it on this podcast? Maybe. I don't know. But anyways, I hadn't seen tons of Cillian Murphy's actual informed acting. And this role is just always so gorgeous for me, because it's like realizing that Dawson, Mark Rylance's character, is actually going to Dunkirk, and the officer, he grows fearful and he's just terrified because he doesn't want to go back there. And then they lock him up. Peter, the blonde son, he locks him up, which just every time you're like, this is a terrible idea. Do not lock up a shell-shocked soldier who is going to freak out. And it really does play out like a horror story. Every time they lock him up, he escapes. They get into a kerfuffle. He pushes George down the stairs and he dies. And you can just see that shell-shocked man become even more jarred and like unable to talk. And they're lying to him that George is going to be okay. And the way they never see him again, and they have to just like bid him farewell. He goes off with the rest of the soldiers at the train station, is so haunting and sad, because ultimately he was responsible for the death of a young boy, but he's fighting for the nation. There's not ever going to be any consequence for that, even if it was an accident, but like that could be manslaughter, I suppose. It's just a really jarring and shocking part of the story, and there's just so much crazy sacrifice and terrifying, jarring sort of emotions of our soldiers. But then you have Farrier, played by Tom Hardy, in the air, who is really pushing to the limit, trying to save everyone on the ground, despite everyone saying like, where the hell is the Air Force? Well, they're trying their best. There's so few planes, because we know that Churchill and the entire military are trying to pull everyone back from Dunkirk to save resources for the Battle of Britain, whereas Farrier is willing to give up all of his fuel, and he reaches Dunkirk just as his fuel runs out. I love the end sequence with Farrier along with the score. I just think it's such a hollowing, sad ending to this movie, which has a very bittersweet ending. All of these young men, they come home and it's enough that they survive, but for some, like Farrier, he's willing to give himself up. We don't know what his, end was. Was he a POW for 4 years and then he was able to run free, or was he traded? Who knows what ended up happening with Farrier? That's the point. We don't know, but he destroys his Spitfire because he doesn't want anything to go to the enemies, gives himself up, and that is the only point where we see the Nazis in the film, is when they are taking Farrier away. I think it's one of the most striking points of the story, because he shoots down the bomber, shoots down the other enemy fighters that are in the air, and he's just this real protector despite his criticism, or the criticism that he is getting from everyone else. It's absolutely fascinating tracking his sort of storyline and his character throughout the story, because you're wondering what is going to be this sort of character arc of the storyline of these pilots. And it's that they're slowly being picked off one by one. We have, the third British soldier who peels away or is shot down maybe. And then we have actually one of the soldiers is voiced by Michael Caine. But then we have, Saoirse Ronan's husband, who has to crash land in the water. He puts himself down. He can't ditch it in the air, and he's rescued by the civilians, Mark Rylance and his son. And that's a really fantastic sequence. But then we have Farrier, who sort of just ends up in this questionless or this ambiguous ending. And I think ending the film on Churchill's, of course, one of the most, important speeches in all of human history, when he says, we will fight on the beaches, we'll fight on the landing grounds. It's a gorgeous ending to this movie, of even if we face this horrible humiliation and the war has just started so terribly for the Allies, all these young men are coming home thinking they're going to be embarrassed and everyone's going to be ashamed of them. And yet we have Harry Styles' character who says like, all we did for survive, and there's the blind man, or I think he's blind, at least he's not looking at anybody, he's not looking them in the eyes, and he says that's enough for now. It's just a really beautiful moment, and everyone's celebrating that these young men made it home and we can push on for the war from here. I just think it's a really beautiful ending to this film with Kenneth Branagh's character telling that he's going to stay and he wants to get more, because remember, at one point in the story they say our goal is to get 30,000 to 40,000 men off this beach. They end up getting 338,000 soldiers total, from Canadians and Belgians and French and British, all off the beach. And it's just a remarkable story where, so many people survive. The one that doesn't survive is essentially George, and then Ferrier gives himself up. Everybody is just so important to this story. I really love the civilian perspective, the former soldier perspective. I don't know, maybe Mark Rylance's character served in World War I in some capacity, but he is a sailor, you never know, and he knows his stuff about boats. And I think maybe there is something alluded to there that he knows about the war, obviously, because his son Peter's brother died in the war also in the Air Force. And it's just like so much historical context within this film, but also just human context and people's lives that are being leaked into this story. It's just a really, really gorgeous tale. I think that's where I'm going to wrap up the spoilers for Dunkirk. Obviously, they've survived. We know how World War II ended, but go and watch Dunkirk. Fantastic film in 4K. Let's move into what else I watched, though. Alrighty, bit of a shorter what else I watched segment this week because I only have 3 films and 2 TV shows to talk about. I haven't had the full week to, catch up on more and more movies, but let's talk about some TV shows. So I told you I would talk about X-Men 97, episode 1 to 3. We have Nathan Summers finding his powers, X-Force versus the government X Factor, which is just so awesome to see. And then, we have the rise of Apocalypse in 3000 BCE. I think this season is fucking peak. Every character is just like an amazing design. Everyone looks so good. I love the teams and how they're broken up. Of course, we have Charles and Magneto, and they're stuck in ancient Egypt together. It's just like so cool. But then I love Jean Grey, Scott Summers having to be with their son in the future, who is Cable, and Cable actually remembering all this stuff happening is just really emotionally devastating to me. Very curious where the rest of the season is going to go from here, because obviously we have the government cracking down on mutants so harshly in the present day with X Factor, and I'm happy to see all those characters back because they were so much fun in season 1. The tragedy of Genosha completely falling apart with the Sentinels, and there's just a lot riding on this season, and it's so interesting how just like who would have thought X-Men 97, that the X-Men animated series from the 1990s would come back and be such a successful sequel? Like, that is such a fantastic series with so many good legendary cartoon episodes that I absolutely adored. I never would have guessed that they could reinvent it and bring it back to a modern audience. I'm so pumped for the rest of the season. I think it wraps up on like August 14th maybe, or something like that. So we're going to do an episode all about season 2. Very excited to talk about it. Let's just quickly talk about My Adventures with Superman season 3, episode 4. Guess who's slamming to dinner? We have Jonathan Kent Jr., I guess, or Jonathan Kent, named after his grandfather, aka Superboy, who travels from the future because Clark and Lois are actually dead in the future. So he comes back in time to try and save them, fix the future. I really liked this episode. I thought it was just sort of very shocking to see Lois so off-put by finding out about her future, because a major theme in this season is Lois not being really ready for the future or wanting to think about the future. She's very focused on the present. She still wants to really focus on her career and being a journalist. She feels like she has so much life left to live before she even thinks about that mature sort of part of her life. And yet it's just like a really gorgeous moment between her and her son, who's from the future. He is getting this special moment out of meeting her because he's never met her, or she's dead in his timeline in the future, and now he's getting to really spend that important time with his parents and his aunt and his uncle Jimmy. And it's just like a really beautiful dynamic that's at play there, and seeing a young, excited Jonathan Kent come to the past to fix all of this stuff in the present day, and yet it seems like he's too late with what's the robot guy, I can't remember, Harvest Harrison, something like that, robot cyborg Superman. The Z on his chest made me think he's like, oh, is he going to be like a General Zod type spinoff or something. I don't know, but everything that they're doing with sort of the emotional stakes of the season, whether it's Kara and Jimmy Olsen, Lois being scared for the future, but now Jonathan Kent coming back to the present and setting up this cyborg Superman taking over Lex Luthor is really cool. I'm curious, like, what's going to happen with Bizarro. Wasn't in episode 4. Are they going to make Bizarro actually a good guy in this timeline or this edition of this world? That would be fun. We haven't really seen that before because Bizarro is usually a villain that is going up against Superman and doing the complete opposite, is annoying him, all that stuff. Anyways, those are the 2 shows that I watched this week. Next week, I will try to watch a bit more TV. I'm going to have lots of fun things that I'm watching next week in Odyssey, a week in total. So let's move to some movies now. I have 3 fun movies to talk about, only one of them a new release. But let's start with David Lynch's Mulholland Drive from 2001. What the actual fuck did I just watch? This is my first time seeing Mulholland Drive. Holy shit. I mean, it's one of the most fun experiences when you're watching a film and you aren't really sure like what the hype is about or where is this going. Like, honestly, 3/4 of the way through, I was like, I don't really get what is so enticing about this, or this better really pick up in the final quarter to win me over. And then there's this revelation that it's all been a dream, and it's like, holy shit. Oh, okay. I'm in. I hate when things end on everything being a dream, but when things sort of halfway through are revealed, or like 3/4 of the way through, and we have a good chunk of movie left, when they are revealed to be a dream, then I'm interested. And I was like, ooh, this is good. I mean, fantastic performances from Naomi Watts, Laura Herring, Justin Theroux, who I'm not a big fan of him, but he's good in this. Ann Miller is hilarious as Coco, and it's just like a really, really, really great cast. David Lynch, of course, it's very dreamlike. You understand why everyone says, oh, it's so Lynchian. I am going to try and watch more of his filmography this year because I just found this so weird, so strange, so off-putting, and like kind of crazy to experience, but I loved it. It's a gorgeous movie. It feels like most of the dream sequence, or like the first 3/4 of the film, are shot a little bit differently than the rest of the movie, and that adds to the dreamlike factor. There's just so much weirdness and sort of floating element or flotation feel to it. I don't even know. It's just like so odd when you're connecting the dots. And then obviously there's the scene at the start of the film with Patrick Fischler, where you're like, what the hell does that have to do with anything? Then it's revealed that, oh, she was just dreaming about him because he's a guy that's in the diner all the time. Very odd. The movie just feels like you're like suffering jet lag. It often feels like you're suddenly, when you're falling asleep and you get that falling sensation. That's how this movie felt to me. I gave it 4.5 stars because it was just genuinely like nothing I've ever experienced before. So weird. It's the most early 2000s dreamlike, odd fantasy sci-fi film. After that, though, way less enjoyable was Voicemails from Isabel. This stars Zoe Deutsch and this guy, what's his name? Nick Robinson. It also has Nick Offerman. And I sort of didn't like this at all. I don't know. I think it's like fine as a rom-com on its own, but it's maybe the most algorithmically generated rom-com I've watched this decade. Like, except the twist is the algorithms from 2016, because we have flash dances, we have awesome possum, cool beans type dialogue, millennial humor. Zoe Deutsch is just kind of annoying in this movie. I don't know. She's not likable. I'm supposed to feel bad because her sister died and she's suffering because she can't listen to these voicemails anymore. She thinks she's leaving voicemails and they're all gone and whatever's happening. I just found her so unlikable and I could not root for her at all in this film. It really, really, really bugged me. And the love interest is just like so bland and boring. And we feel bad for him because he's in finance and he's saving up for his Magic the Gathering card. And his mom died a long time ago. Yes, that is actually a very sad part of this movie. The death parts did make me sad, but otherwise it's just like an ugly movie that looks like a medical commercial from 2016. And it's just blah, blah, blah from start to finish. I'm going to make a review for my social media that is probably out by the time you're listening to this, of course. But honestly, I'm happy others like this movie, but it just felt sort of low effort, dated, derivative TikTok comments, like dialogue as well. Oh my God, the way she's like, my dude. And it just is so strange. It's like she's doing an Andy Samberg impression and there's a Benson Boone and Taylor Swift needle drop. Just stop it. Stop it immediately. I gave it 2.5 stars. But then we finished the week on a somewhat strong note. I watched Jason and the Argonauts. I was watching this in preparation for the Odyssey because it's a pretty similar type story where, this guy has to go on a journey in order to save his kingdom and he's dealing with all these gods and monsters. I didn't read about the Wikipedia of this and I actually have terrible Greek historical knowledge. I don't know anything about the gods or very limited limited. Weirdly enough, in school, as much as I studied history, we never talked about the Greek gods or like the Romans or anything like that. We didn't study anything ancient. It was very European, World War I, World War II focused, and like Russian history or whatever, just like very different things that I studied. But very fun movie to watch because it is from 1963. There's stop motion animation in this and just like crazy creatures, and the performances are really stiff and bad, and it's that old school theater acting that is then coming to the movies and isn't, you know, on screen. But I really enjoyed the color and the presentation overall. I think it was a fun film to pick up on before the Odyssey and get you in the mood for the, what is it called, swords and sandals type films, where it's, you know, swords and sandals. I think it's swords and sandals, but getting you in the mood for this very big movie that is coming in the future. So I gave Jason and the Argonauts 3.5 stars. But for now, that has been what else I watched. And in fact, I think that's going to do it for episode 127, Watcher Watchback on Dunkirk. Maybe a shorter episode this week. I don't know. We'll see when I edit it down. But Dunkirk, I absolutely love it so much. Oh my God. It's crazy how within most other directors' filmographies, this would be my favorite film. But within Nolan's, I don't even think it cracks the top 5. I still think it is an absolutely gorgeous, fantastic, thrilling, action-packed film that you guys need to watch before the Odyssey. But as always, please rate and review the show 5 stars wherever you get your great podcasts like Watcher of All Things, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or Acast. We are, of course, an Acast produced show. If you're on Spotify, you can actually comment right underneath the episode. What do you think of Dunkirk? Where does it stand in Nolan's filmography? Are you seeing the Odyssey? What format are you seeing it in? If you're on the YouTube channel, hit like, subscribe, answer all those questions down below in the comments. What other movies are you looking forward to this summer? I mean, obviously Spider-Man Brand New Day is going to be fantastic by the looks of it. I am very much looking forward to that film. Let me know, what are your top 5 movies of 2026 so far? I almost said 2025, but we're a little bit past that. Also, make sure you're subscribed because we will have lots of other videos coming out over the rest of the year. I try to do a monthly video. Fun stuff. If you want to get in touch with the show, email me, watcherofallthings@gmail.com, and find me on social media. Instagram and Threads are just at Watcher of All Things, but the TikTok account is at watcher.of.all.things. I post videos on social media every single day, and you can follow my personal Letterboxd account, KikiJ70. That's KIKIJ70. I'm a Letterboxd Patreon religious Letterboxd user. You can see my ranking of the 2026 films that I've watched. I have a Nolan ranking list on there as well for the moment. Lots of other ranking lists like Star Wars, Batman movies, superhero movies, whatever it might be. Follow me on there. Drop a comment under one of my reviews that you found me through the show. I will follow you back, of course. Let's build a little community. Next week, though, guys, it's the big one. It's like the biggest episode to date. This year, we have Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. I'm seeing it in laser IMAX on a Thursday night, 70 millimeter regular film, cropped, of course, in like just the regular standard format, 70 millimeter on Friday night. Then Sunday, I am seeing it in 70 millimeter IMAX. I'm so fucking excited. It's going to be fantastic. Looking forward to it. But until then, thank you all so much for listening. Thank you for all the kind messages I get from you guys every single week. I love hearing from you. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.